You are watching AI Storytelling, YTS.
The night air around St. Mary's Church never seemed to rest, even when the village of Ravensdale lay quiet under the weight of midnight. The broken steeple loomed against the sky like a blackened finger, pointing upward in warning rather than prayer. Locals swore the church still breathed. A faint exhalation of cold would seep through its crumbling stones, carrying with it the scent of mildew, blood, and old smoke. Though its doors had been sealed with iron chains more than a century ago, villagers claimed to hear them groan open on certain nights, especially when the wind died and the fields turned silent. On such nights, the bell of St. Mary's would toll, a bell that no longer existed. At the heart of it all was a name no one dared to speak past sundown: Father Gabriel Ward. Once he had been the parish priest of St. Mary's, a stern but beloved figure. But during the plague winter of 1634, when Ravensdale buried half its souls beneath frozen soil, whispers spread that Father Ward had not prayed for salvation, but bargained with damnation. They said he locked the church doors while villagers pounded from the outside, seeking refuge. They said he let them die, their fingers bloodied against the wood, so he could preserve himself and his holy relics. When the pestilence lifted, the survivors dragged him from the altar and hanged him from his own bell rope. His last words, carried in a guttural rasp, were not pleas for mercy, but a curse. "None shall leave this house of God unbound from me. None." From that night forward, the church grew colder. Birds abandoned its roof, ivy withered at its walls, and even the soil in its graveyard turned barren. The villagers built a new chapel in the square, but St. Mary's was left to rot. Still, no one ever ventured near, not after dusk, not even in daylight, if the sky was heavy with cloud. Children dared each other to touch its iron gate, but those who lingered too long swore they heard the shuffling of robes behind the doors and the scrape of a confessional curtain being drawn aside. Now, centuries later, its shadow still dominated the hill, and on a damp autumn evening, as mist bled through the cobblestone streets of Ravensdale, the whisper of Father Gabriel Ward returned once more. "Enter and confess." ... Eleanor Carter had read every account she could find about St. Mary's Church. The plague winter, the execution of Father Ward, the strange disappearances of surveyors in the 1800s. To her, it was the perfect subject for her book on cursed houses of worship. But as the taxi wound its way along the twisting lanes toward Ravensdale, she could not shake the feeling that the air itself grew colder with every mile. The headlights glanced off hedgerows that seemed too thick, too tangled, as though nature itself was trying to conceal something. Beside her sat James Miller, his jacket collar turned up against the drizzle. He was a journalist for the Yorkshire Chronicle, roped into Eleanor's investigation because his editor believed local folklore sold papers. Unlike her, he had no patience for ghost stories. The taxi dropped them at the Ravensdale Inn, the only lodging in town. Inside, the air smelled of peat smoke and damp wool. Conversation at the bar hushed when the two strangers entered, their suitcases trailing water across the floor. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man with thinning hair, handed them a key without a smile. "You're here for the church," he said flatly, not asking but accusing. Eleanor hesitated. "We're researchers, historians." "You'll not find history up there," the man replied. His eyes shifted to James, then back to her. "Only graves, graves and silence." From the far corner, an old woman's voice broke in. Her back was stooped, her hair white as chalk, but her eyes glimmered sharp. "Leave it alone." She rose from her chair and shuffled closer, the entire room watching as she approached. St. Mary's doesn't welcome visitors. Father Ward doesn't welcome them. James forced a polite smile. "With respect, ma'am, ghosts don't exist." The old woman's lips curled. Tell that to the surveyors who went missing in '67. Tell it to the vicar's boy who wandered in on a dare and came out 3 days later with his hair white as mine. The inn fell silent. Only the crackle of the fire filled the pause. Eleanor swallowed. "What's your name?" "Margaret Whitfield," the woman replied. "And if you've any sense, you'll leave at first light. Because when the bell tolls, it's already too late." Mist clung to the cobblestones as Eleanor and James left the inn, their breath fogging in the chill. The villagers watched them from behind curtains and doorways, muttering as they passed. No one offered directions. They didn't need to. St. Mary's towered over Ravensdale, its broken spire black against the pale sky, impossible to ignore. The road to the church wound uphill through tangled hedges. A weathered sign still hung there, its letters barely legible. Condemned. Entry forbidden. Eleanor pressed a hand to the gate. The metal was cold, too cold, as if the iron itself held memory. She pushed, and with a groan like a dying animal, the gate swung open. The path beyond was lined with leaning gravestones, their inscriptions eaten away by moss. Crows squatted on the stones, watching silently as the intruders passed. The church loomed above them, its windows black sockets, its great wooden doors chained shut, a pressure in the air, like 1,000 unseen eyes fixed on her. They circled the church until they found a side door, its lock long since broken. Eleanor pushed it open, the wood groaning in protest. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air changed. The smell hit first, damp rot, old smoke, and beneath it, something coppery, metallic. Blood. Inside, the church was frozen in decay. The pews lay scattered and broken, their wood warped and blackened by centuries of damp. The altar stood cracked and leaning, its cloth shredded to rags. In the far corner, a confessional booth sagged in the shadows, its curtain half-rotted, swaying though there was no draft. And then, the sound. A whisper, so faint it could have been imagination. Words too quick, too low to catch, but spoken in a rhythm. A prayer. The whisper grew louder, still in Latin, still half-swallowed, as though spoken through water. Eleanor clutched her notebook, her scholar's mind racing, but her body froze with dread. James, stubborn as ever, strode toward the sound. His footsteps echoed, too loud in the vast ruin. "Hello?" he called, his voice cracking against the silence. "Anyone here?" The whisper ceased. Silence. Then from the shadows of the confessional, the curtain drew back. No hand touched it. No draft stirred it. But it shifted, slow and deliberate, opening just enough to reveal the blackness inside. Eleanor saw it. A pale shape in the dark. A face, gaunt and hollow-eyed, watching them with a stare that pinned her to the spot. She blinked, and it was gone. The curtain hung still again. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed from the entrance. Both of them spun around as another figure stepped inside. A young man in a long coat, his hair damp from the mist. His eyes lit with relief when he saw them. The stranger gave a small, nervous smile. "Daniel Harris, theology student at Durham. I've studied St. Mary's for years. When I heard someone else was investigating, I thought, well, maybe I wouldn't be alone in here." Eleanor exhaled, tension breaking just slightly. "I'm Eleanor Carter, this is James Miller." But the words caught in her throat, because behind Daniel, in the doorway, the faintest outline of a man still lingered. A figure in priestly robes, his head tilted at a grotesque angle, as though his neck had snapped from a noose. And then the door slammed shut, rattling the walls. The church was sealed. The slam of the door echoed through the nave, rattling dust from the rafters. James rushed to it at once, tugging at the iron handle. "Locked," he muttered, yanking harder. "From the outside." "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered. "It wasn't locked when we came in." Daniel's gaze swept the dim interior, his hand tightening around the small crucifix that hung from his neck. "It doesn't matter how. We're not alone in here. Eleanor steadied her breath. She had studied haunted places all her life, but no book had ever captured this feeling. The church wasn't just occupied by something, it was something. Living, watching, waiting. They moved cautiously up the central aisle. James lit cigarette, his hands trembling slightly as he cupped the flame. "Look at this," Eleanor whispered, kneeling near the altar rail. She brushed away centuries of grime, revealing carved words beneath. Latin, etched deep into the wood. She mouthed the translation aloud. "None shall leave this house unbound from me." Daniel flinched. That's his curse. The last words Father Ward ever spoke. Subscribe for the second part. Coming soon. Till that time, share your horror experience in comments below.